Good afternoon. Welcome to the Bob Unger Show. We have a very interesting guest who is living, unfortunately, what many parents that I've spoken to across America have experienced. His name is Gerald Weisfeld. And is it Weisfeld or Wiesfeld?
Weisfeld.
Weisfeld, okay. And he is active in New Jersey, and he noticed that things were not quite right in the local schools. So why don't you, Jared, tell us about it and how you came to learn about it and exactly what's happening?
So, long story short, is a child brought a weapon to school. Um, Later on that day, the child was still in school, and in a class, the weapon was confiscated. In the class, he was jabbing a girl with a writing instrument, and he wouldn't leave her alone. And the kid next to her asked the child to stop, and leave her alone. And the child wrote on a piece of paper, the same child that brought the weapon to school, wrote on a piece of paper, bucket list, kill this kid, kill that kid, which were the two kids in the class, the one he was jabbing and the one that asked for the child to stop. And he then proceeded to put it in their faces so that they could see what he had written. Later on that day, the child decided to go on his school issued Google Chromebook and search not killing people. Um, Now, the weapon that was confiscated, the police were notified immediately. When they found the kill list and they found the search, they waited an entire day before they called the police. Um, and by that time, and both parents, the parent of the child that brought the weapon to school was notified. The parent of the female classmate was notified. The only parent that wasn't notified was the child who uh, stood up for the other girl, right? And so that child had, I mean, the child was brought down to the assistant principal's office. They said, "Do you know why you're here?" He was like, "Am I in trouble?" They said, "No." They said, "Well," they explained to him that, that there was a kill list. His name was on it. And they asked him if he was scared. And he said, "Yes, because I heard the kid brought a knife to school." And then they said, "Go home and tell your parents, they're going to be very angry." Right. So when you say that to a child, that's, you know, not, young kid. When you say, that to a child, they're thinking that they're in trouble, right? Go home and tell your parents, they're going to be really angry. When the parents found out, they contacted the school on Sunday. They found out on Friday from their child Friday night. They contacted the school on Sunday. Monday, the school said, "We need to speak on the phone," because obviously they don't want to put anything in writing. Speak on the phone, and they say that the child wasn't being completely forthright, that it wasn't a weapon that was brought to school, but it was an inappropriate item slash tool. And later on that day, there wasn't a kill list, but the child wrote a statement on a piece of paper. Well, the parents said, "Well, were the police called about the so-called item that you're talking about?" And they said, "Yes." And they said, "Well, did the piece of paper say on it, kill our son?" And they said, "Yes." So they go, "So what our son told us was true?" And they go, "No, no." They go, "Well, there was a weapon brought to school and there was a kill list." And they repeatedly said it was a statement and that it was an item, right? So next thing I contact the parents. I contact the school and say, "Hey, I heard this story. Why didn't you notify all the parents?" And they said, "Well, why would we?" And I was like, "Well, a kid brought a weapon to school, created a kill list. You think it would be something that parents would want to know." And but meanwhile, the other parents finally, when they contacted the school, they said, "Well, obviously the kid that brought the weapon and created the kill list isn't in school anymore, right?" They go, "Oh, no, no, he's in school." the parents, what do you mean he's in school? And they said, yeah. They said, oh. And then the parents ran to go pick their children up because they didn't want him in school, obviously. And they said, why isn't that kid in a different class? And they said, well, we're never going to do that, but we'll move your kid. And the parents were like, wait a second. The kid that actually said, like, please, like, leave the girl alone? You want him to switch classes to accommodate the kid that brought a weapon and had a kill list? And they said, yes. And the parents, that's never going to happen. And so in our town, they have something called home rule. In our state, it's a home rule state. And so you can't, so police and the mayor are completely separate than the school district. So the police need permission to go into the schools, right? The schools don't have to call the police under, unless it's like extreme circumstances. And so basically what happened here is the police did their job that the school didn't. And after about 7 days or so, the child was removed from school because of the police, according to the school, and that they had no further information. So basically, a kid that brought a weapon to school, created a kill list, was allowed in school for 7 days, and it took 7 days for the parents to get their kids back in school because they didn't want them in school with this child, which I'm sure you can understand. Now, it gets a little crazier because I spoke at a board meeting. I let the town know because I thought it was an important thing that everybody should know what had happened. A local paper was there. They covered it. An article came out, and the superintendent said my comments were erroneous and that they weren't. I wasn't being, true. It wasn't a weapon that was brought to school, but it was an inappropriate item. Well, what's the first thing you think of when I say the word box cutter?
I th I think of 9/11.
So the kid brought in an item, which was a box cutter. The kid didn't work at Amazon, right? Brought in a box cutter, right? So the superintendent didn't realize probably that I knew what the weapon was. I knew it was a box cutter, right? Uh, but in between that time, so before that time, I had set up a meeting. I knew the school security was awful. And I set up a meeting with Wayne Black, who is a former personal detail for Donald Rumsfeld and secures temples, churches, schools all across the country. In fact, all across the world. He's a leading expert on school security. So I had him meet with the superintendent, the president of the Board of Education, the police chief, detectives, sergeants. The police are 100% on board with school security. Um, the superintendent, I think, wants school security, but she's very budget conscious. So Wayne was telling us about $18 walkie-talkies or an inexpensive app as a deterrent. We need SROs in all of our schools, or SLEO 3 officers. In Florida, they call them guardians. He gave them all the tips. And so when Wayne got off the Zoom, I said to the superintendent, well, is this a budget issue or is this I don't want it issue? And they said, well, it's a budget issue. And I said, well, you really can't afford this? I was like, we got a $60 million budget. It's like de minimis what we're talking about. They go, we can't afford it. We could try and put it in for next year's budget. But I don't know. So I said, how about this? I was like, I'll pay, my wife and I will pay for a pilot program in one school, right? Where we'll either do the walkie-talkies or the app, right? And if it works, you have to roll it out to every school in the district. And that's what I'd like to see done. And they said, wow, I was like, yeah, I'll make a donation. I'll put my money where my mouth is, right? And I decided the walkie-talkies were a bad idea because if you give teachers and walkie-talkies, right, they're not going to have them charged. There's a lot of maintenance to go with walkie-talkies. But with an app on a phone, it's called Safer Watch. With the app on a phone, It's easy, right? You push a button, it takes you directly to the, if there's an active shooter, you push a button, it's geo fenced, so it knows everywhere you are. The police get live video feeds, so they know exactly where the person is, how they can get to them quicker. Um, and they declined my donation a couple of weeks later based on equity. They said since it was only going to be available in one school, it wasn't going to be available in every school. So therefore, it was not equitable. And I just said, what does equity have to do with this? Because a pilot program, you said you can't afford something. A pilot program is me using my equity and my wife using her equity, our equity together. And we're giving you something for free. If it works, no harm, no foul. I said, I'll even give you one better. I said, if you come back to me in a year and you say, this program, this app, like we need this app, it's doing really well. We can't afford it in the other schools. I'd say I'll pay for it for another 2 years until you guys get your act together. Because if you're telling me it's saving lives, like I'm going to continue doing it because in my head, how could I rationalize not? Right? I started it. I'm not just going to stop it. And so they decline me based on equity. I don't think educators really understand what the word equity is. Unfortunately, in life, nobody's ever going to be equal. It's an impossibility. You're always going to have the Elon Musks of the worlds. You're always going to have the Mr. Ungers of the worlds, the
You mean
me's of
I
the world.
you mean I couldn't beat Michael Jordan one on one?
That my point, yes, but my you can't. But my point is equity is never going to. It's impossible for it to ever be equal. I understand why people want equity. I think we all would prefer everybody to, I'm sure you would prefer to be able to beat Michael Jordan one on one. I know I would love to.
Not gonna happen.
Yes, but
Ever.
so the point is, I think people take equity and they take equity to another level. In this instance, equity was me trying to use my equity in order to make a situation better in the hopes that they would see if it worked. And if it worked, they would roll it out everywhere. And if it didn't, I was the one that lost the money. So what they said was, well, we can't take an earmark donation, but what we can do is take your money and use it towards security how we see fit. And I said, that's never going to happen. So what I decided to do was I donated I'm donating money to a program through a college in Florida that has experts that have been working on a project for years about school security, basically prevention, right? So things to look for at home. So if your kids come home and they're talking about something that happened in school, right? You're more trained to listen to trigger words. Or if um, or if like you pick your kid up from school and you see like, wow, this is kind of strange, right? So you could talk to your kids more and things that you could ask. And it's preventing. And so what I decided to do was I made a donation to that school. In return, everybody in my town is going to be able to take that program for free. And I'm going to run it through the Berkeley Heights Police Department instead of the school district, because the police genuinely care about our children. In fact, the police are the only ones that reached out to those kids and asked them how they were doing. The school, nothing, crickets. But the police took the kids to the station, told them they'd be safe, walked them around, introduced them to all the officers, said, what could we do to make you feel comfortable? They went out of their way. So the same people that, people don't want around the schools are really the only ones that could keep our kids safe. And and they are keeping our kids safe. And I'm grateful that it took them having to do a full investigation to get things accomplished, as opposed to the school just brushing it under the rug.
I
And
don't
one of
know
the
if
things,
you're aware, in New Jersey and also in Pennsylvania, there was a very intelligent nurse who murdered 400 people in the hospitals in New Jersey and in Pennsylvania. And it was only the police that learned the pharmacology and figured out how this nurse was killing everybody. Every hospital administration not only knew that he was killing everybody, they deliberately covered it up because they didn't want to lose money. And it was only the cops that refused to give in and buckle under to the pressure they were under because they couldn't stand the fact that this guy was murdering so many innocent people. And the analogy kind of runs through every institution in America today. If you want to read some great books on education that I started reading 30 years ago when I realized what was really going on, one is called Inside American Education by Dr. Thomas Sowell. Another book is called Ed School Follies by Rita Kramer. Rita enrolled in every school of education in the United States, one by one, and recorded what the teachers were being taught. And they were basically being taught that parents have no right and don't know how to raise their own kids. And therefore, the bureaucrats have to raise their kids for them. And everything was equity this, equity that, equity this, equity that. And so, what equity really is regimented mediocrity. Because if you can dumb me down enough, I can beat Michael Jordan by lowering the basket to only 6 inches off the ground. And at that point, even I can dunk backwards. And I'm closer to the basket than Michael Jordan is. So lower the standards and everyone becomes a genius. I'm a graduate of the Bronx High School of Science, which back in the day, in the 60s, was legendary. It was the smartest gang of Jews that ever assembled in a building. I was like the dumbest guy in the school. And if you look at Bronx Science today, even it still is considered a top school. Those kids don't even come close to what they were in the 60s. And the real proof is to go out and buy an old copy of McGuffey's Reader, 1828, and look at the fourth grade reader. The fourth grade reader is above a college level of today. It's not even close. Don't forget the people that wrote the Constitution, that wrote the Declaration of Independence, that wrote the Federalist Papers. They were all young, older teenagers, 18, 19, 20. They were geniuses compared to the idiots you have running things today. And I'm being very generous by saying idiots.
So, um, the uh, the superintendent after that article came out was very upset and decided that she was going to leak my emails to the press, which she did. Um, and then those emails were inappropriate things like where my children go to school, other things, an email that she claimed she wrote to me that I never received. Uh, you know, just she also, I mean, if you saw my speech, and if you have a chance, I invite your viewers to go tap into Berkeley Heights School Parent, and read the article, for yourself, judge for yourself. It's a very if there's one door unlocked, right, it's a failure. Um, because the people at Uvalde and Parkland all wish every single door was locked, right? If every single door was locked, the outcome would have been different. So zero fail is, something every school should strive for. Now, my issue with the Department of Education in New Jersey is that you're required by law to have. Well, let me step back for a second. So she said I lied, right? But if you read the emails that she forwarded to the press, she admits that I was telling the truth and that the person was disciplined for what happened, or the quote unquote, the teacher will never make that mistake again. So how you could call me a liar to the press, but then leak my emails that show that I'm telling the truth, shows you, you know, what kind of situation we're dealing with. But Wayne Black is actually writing a book called School Insecurity. It's about how you can keep your kids safe in school and things that parents should know that they could ask administrators and board of eds and everything that they should look out for to prevent this kind of stuff. And I'm just a parent that saw something that happened bad in the schools. And it's not the only thing that's happened bad in the schools. And there's things that are happening bad in every school across the country. It's systemic, right? They just want to push things under the rug to protect their brand.
How
Everything's
about
about branding.
how about giving young boys butt plugs in the school?
Huh?
How
Um,
about giving young boys butt plugs in the school?
well, I don't know anything about that.
That's going on at the Parker School in Chicago. They've got there's a group called Project Veritas is the group, and they get these characters to come on camera without knowing it, and they pretend to be one of them, and they get them to not only admit what they're doing but brag about it. And that was stated by the dean of students at the Parker School, and he was talking about how wonderful it is to give underage children butt plugs. So, look, I've spent 30 years reading nonstop, studying the history. There's a very good book to read written by a friend of mine, Alex Newman. It's called Crimes of the Educators. And I don't think parents are even having a clue as to what's really happening because most of us tend to want to believe that the institutions are like our mommy and our daddy. We're like little children, and we trust that our mommy and our daddy wouldn't do anything to hurt us. So if they wouldn't do anything to hurt us, why would the establishment authorities ever want to do anything to hurt us? The fact is, most of them are people who just want to get ahead and get their big salaries, like where I live in Great Neck. These guys are making major six figures. For what? They have the lowest SAT scores in America. Teachers, there's been many statistics that have come out in books. They are generally, not all the time, but generally, the dumbest people at every university. And so they will fall for anything because they stand for nothing. And parents don't want to know the truth because once you know the truth, the ball shifts to your court and you have to take action. And people today are so much like rats running on a wheel, going after the cheese, trying to make more money and have more Mercedes and more Lexus and more jewelry and more vacations that they do not do right by the most precious thing they could ever have, which is their children. People in the old days, when America was a great country, they would never benefit themselves at the expense of their children. They'd rather be dead. But today we've lost that. And
Listen,
so
I
what are
say
the
to the
Democrats?
school all the time,
Yeah,
the only thing that could stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun.
of course.
And our school budget is $60 million. How much do you think we pay the Berkeley Heights Police Department a year for an SRO officer? $60 million budget. How much do you think we contribute to the Berkeley Heights Police Department, to the Board of Education?
5,000?
No, $25,000 out of a $60 million budget.
Of course.
So, as Wayne Black always says, is you can't put a price tag on a life. Budget-based security doesn't work. You have to do what you need to do, right? And if you don't, I mean, you're going to have failures. You can't have one SRO officer for six schools bouncing around. You need SLEO threes, or in Florida, they have guardians. They also have SROs. And in Florida, my belief is that if a school doesn't have an SRO or a guardian present, the governor withholds the superintendent's pay until that's done. That's their recourse. I could tell you that Governor Murphy in New Jersey is one of the most pro school security governors in the country, by far. He was one of the first ones to implement Alyssa's law, which is from Parkland, that every school in New Jersey had to have a panic button. He's implementing now threat assessments for next year. So he's above and going above and beyond the the what needs to. I mean, he wants to keep children safe. He's open about it. He has experts. He does everything he can. So does Ron DeSantis. Um, so when you have two governors that are passionate, one being a Democrat and one being a Republican, I always say, right, like regardless if you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent, keeping our kids safe is a non-political issue.
It should be.
Anybody that makes it political, to me, um, doesn't have the kids' best interest at heart. And I could tell you in my state, Governor Murphy is doing the best he can. And in Florida, Ron DeSantis is doing the best they can because you know what home rule is, right? Home rule law.
Yeah.
Uh, and we have that in New Jersey. So you can't force somebody to do something. You could you could advise, right? New York, for example, Alyssa's law was passed in New York. Governor said, you know, it's not mandatory, but it's suggested, right? New Jersey, it's mandatory. You have to have it in every school has to have a panic button. So think about a Democratic governor, right? Passing that as law in the state of New Jersey, right? You would never see that in any other state. That's somebody that really is passionate about school security. And I will give him that is that when it comes to school security, I think he's ahead of the curve. And same with Ron DeSantis, right? You have to have governors that care and believe, you know, so one of the things that everybody's always talking about is mental health, right? Mental health therapy. And they're 100% right. Like kids can be stopped from, if you look at all the school shootings that have happened, right? These kids were all had issues starting in kindergarten,
And
second, third.
they were all on pharmacological drugs.
But the issue is that the school never did anything about it, right? These kids should have been in mental health therapy in kindergarten, second, third grade, right? The last thing anybody wants is a kid turning violent, right? We want every kid, if we have mental health therapy at our disposal, we want every kid to, and I'm not a doctor, I'm not talking about medications. I'm talking about if you see something is wrong with a child and that a child is doing something wrong in school, instead of brushing it under the rug, get the kid the help he needs because you can't say you're for school security or you know you don't want anything to happen to a child, but you brush it under the rug. And if the kid had been, you know, if a doctor had said, you know what, this kid, any kid is not should not be at school, right? They should be, you know, doing this or doing that, right? Like you need that in order to stop school shootings. You need that. You need
Check
it.
out check out Dr. Peter Breggin, Breggin. His book is called Talking Back to Ritalin, and he correlates these drugs that the kids are encouraged to be on in school with the school shootings. In fact, there's a great article that's a takeoff on the rock group Guns N' Roses. Instead, the article is called Guns and Doses. And you'll find that there is an incredible causation and correlation between the two. But we've got to wind down. I'm getting a message from the Zoom. So to sum up, uh, you're also a publisher, right?
Yeah, I publish books. I'm a literary agent.
Right.
I
Do you know
also came
Tony
from the music
Lyons?
world. What?
Do you know Tony Lyons?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, I just interviewed him a few times and we've become friends. He published Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s book, The Real Anthony Fauci.
Yeah, sure. Skyhorse Publishing.
Yes, yeah, very interesting guy. And also a freedom advocate, free speech advocate. And this is one of the big problems. We're losing our free speech. If you talk out against the establishment, you get slandered, like they called you a liar. That is slanderous because in order to be a liar, they have to prove that something you said is not true. And if it is true and they called you a liar, which in essence they did, uh,
Well, erroneous is the
erroneous.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, the the it's a little hard to be erroneous about the facts that you've stated. A box cutter is a box cutter.
Yeah, so one of the things before we wrap up, one of the things I wanted to tell you is the parents didn't actually find out about the not killing people Google Chromebook search until they obtained the police report. And that's how they found out. The school hid that from them, that the kid had written not killing people on his Google Chromebook. So the school wasn't forthright with the parents. You know, I it's just look, the school board doesn't want to do anything. The superintendent isn't doing anything. The police are doing something. I'm doing something. Clearly, I'm speaking out. But if the superintendent and the school board don't want to do their job, they need to step away and they need to put some people in that do. It's about time that I do believe it's about time that government does get involved, like they did in New York City when New York City schools got so bad they put in a chancellor. Um, I do believe that and you may not like that chancellor, but the point is, I do believe in states where there are issues in schools that are being brushed under the rug. I do think they should be able to appoint somebody at a state level that can oversee schools to make sure that this doesn't happen. So there's accountability. Because, if you run for the Board of Education, right, you don't want to admit that the person that you hired to be the superintendent or that you voted to extend the contract isn't doing a good job because that would make you look like you made a bad decision. So the only person that can fire the superintendent is the Board of Education. Nobody else can. There's a Union County superintendent, but they don't have jurisdiction to fire a superintendent. Only the BOE does.
When my deceased law partner unfortunately died prematurely, he had just run for the school district, the board, and when he got up to speak, the teachers union had packed the room with all of their puppets. And as he began to speak, they said, "Aren't you a Catholic?" I mean, think about that. What does that have to do with anything? But because he was talking out for teaching kids math, reading, science, and not all the tangential nonsense that they teach, they said, "Aren't you a Catholic?" So by attacking his religion, they were somehow smearing him because he's a Catholic. God forbid he's a Catholic. That's like a crime. And that's how they operate. They smear. They're not interested in truth. There's an actor, Tim Robbins. I just saw him interviewed by the other actor, Russell Brand, and he's speaking out now. And he's the exact opposite of me. Very liberal, you know, left wing, whatever you want to call him. He agrees with me 100% on what's happening with all the institutions. And he's begun to realize that all the demonization of people who buck the establishment that he used to believe is all untrue. But anyway, great to speak to you. Repeat your website again.
Oh, objectiveent.com.
Okay, great. Well, let us know how things progress. And it was great speaking to you, and God bless.
Thank you so much. You as well.
Okay, take care.